Hello, welcome to today's immigration tidbit. I get a lot of clients who are at different phases and different parts of their immigration process. Okay, some already have the green card and then they want to renew the green card. Some want to naturalize. Some are in removal proceedings. Some have already been removed. So it's all over the board. And what happens is a crime was committed, okay? And they either come to me before, during, after, or about to, okay? All of these different uh, scenarios that they may come. And the issue is whether the crime is a violation of good moral character, okay? There's all kinds of stuff in immigration law about what is determinative of good moral character, whether or not it makes someone removable, whether or not it affects their ability to naturalize, whether or not they'll be stopped at the border when re-entering, whether or not there's a risk of leaving, whether or not there's a risk of renewing their green card, how they can fight removal proceedings, if there are waivers available, if there's no waivers available, if criminal relief should be done. And these are just a few of the issues. Okay, so when sometimes people will send me a consult and they'll say, I've been convicted of this and that. Is that a crime of good moral character? And how will it affect me? It's not quite that easy just to say, yes, it is, and this is what will happen. Because as immigration attorneys, we're charged with tearing apart the statutes, making sense of them, and fighting ones that don't make sense and trying to go to court in order to get determinations as to whether or not it falls under the statute or doesn't. You can't assume that every single crime that is committed is one involving good moral character. I mean, there are ones that, right off the bat, you can more or less say are not violations of good moral character. So, for example, if the crime does not involve any mens rea at all, which means no mental element to the crime. So, for example, if someone is going to commit burglary, they intend essentially to go into a place to take something. Okay? If they didn't intend to do that, it wouldn't be burglary. So, for example, just a little criminal law here. If somebody put a gun to your head and said, go inside that store and steal a fur coat or I'll kill you, okay? By going in the store, you're not committing burglary because you're not really intending to steal it. What you are intending is to save your life. You are doing it under duress, okay? So that wouldn't be burglary. And so by the same token, when I say that certain statutes do not fall under good moral character issues, it's when they don't have any mens rea requirements. So for example, let's say you drink 4 beers, and let's say your blood alcohol is tested and it's 1.0. And let's say the statute says if your blood alcohol is over 0.8, you are legally drunk, and then, various penalties. So that doesn't have any mens rea requirement because it doesn't matter what you intended or didn't intend. If the blood alcohol test is taken and it's over 0.8, that's what it is, and you're guilty of the crime, period. Okay? So the intent or the mens rea is where we start in order to determine if a crime violates good moral character. Okay? That's not to say there are not exceptions, not issues, and so forth, but that's the general rule. So if there is a mens rea requirement, then there are all kinds of other items that need to be analyzed in the statute to determine if it falls under whether or not it's a violation of good moral character. which is why lawyers do what they do. They tear apart the statutes. They determine if there's a plausible argument that it is not a violation, and they bring suits for clarification. And it may or may not go up on appeal. Since the Immigration Act, the current one, was enacted, I believe, in 1996, since that time, there's been a ton of ambiguity as to what is meant by this or that. And there's been lots of cases that have been brought to court, and obviously not all of them win. But there has been a substantial amount that have won in court in clarifying that a particular statute is not a crime of good moral character. And so that's why it's not so easy to just say that it is or it isn't. And then we have the additional difficulty of jurisdictionally, where is the person? If a person calls me and asks me about a particular crime in California, let's just use burglary again, versus someone who calls me in Florida and asks me, the exact statute, and I'm not saying the statutes are always exact, but let's just say they had the exact statutes. They might be interpreted differently by circuit courts of appeal in those jurisdictions. And the circuit courts of appeal take precedence over what the BIA, the Board of Immigration Appeals, may rule. So there's all kinds of research that would need to be done jurisdictionally to ensure that the interpretation of the particular statute that you might have been convicted under is or is not a crime involving good moral character. Okay? So, to be honest, anyone who says they've done their 15 minutes of research on the internet and they've determined that it is or it isn't, you got to really take that with a grain of salt, because that's great that they've done their 15 minutes of research, but that's not really what's needed to make a determinative result, an analysis of whether or not it is. So this brings up the idea that when you are, for example, pleading guilty to something, you've got to have an immigration attorney's advice. You cannot just, again, think that, oh, the criminal attorney said that instead of getting 2 years of jail, I'll get 2 months, therefore it's got to be a good deal. Because when it comes right down to it, when you are done with your criminal side of it, immigration takes over, and that ultimately is more important, because that's where you're going to either end up staying or being deported or being able to become a citizen or not a citizen or being, removed from the U.S. There's all kinds of stuff. So you need to have an immigration attorney's advice anytime you plead guilty to a crime that you are not a U.S. citizen. Okay? If you're not a U.S. citizen, you got to get that advice. All right? So this was a small nutshell of crimes of good moral character. Okay.